All right, we will call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Start with roll call. Gail?
Gail Linden.
Blake Moore.
Chris Gombieski.
Sheldon Cohn.
Michelle Elder.
And Rick Poland. Looking for an approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving on to approval of the minutes.
I only found one eagle eye correction, and that is sometimes you are referred to as the vice chair on pages 1 and 2, and then when we get to page 3, you're now listed throughout as the chair, and the same on 4 and continuing. So,
We will make that correction. He should be listed as the vice chair, which is his office.
Okay, any other corrections? Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
as amended, so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, item number 5, matter of site plan review for an addition at 10805 Lincoln.
I'm going to put this up, so give me just a moment.
Okay.
Because we appear to be having.
Mr. Chair, I think the applicant should be informed that they still need 5 votes to approve the application, notwithstanding the fact that we're short a couple of people.
We are in fact 2 members short, so instead of having 9, there's 7 total members, and you do need 5 affirmative votes to proceed with that.
Usually, in this case, although we have 7, so it's not like you have to have 100%, but you can decide how you want to read the room after we go through the presentation, that sort of thing. And then if you would like for us to table it, or however we word that, you can let us know.
Okay.
Before we,
Before we vote. It has to happen before we vote. So, do you have your architect or designer with you?
We do not.
Okay. Would you mind just telling us who you are and giving us a little description of the project, and then Hank will take over and give us the details on it?
Yeah, and you can feel free to fill in anything that you feel that I missed when we go through
Okay.
it. Okay?
All right. Well, first off, thank you everyone for being here tonight. We appreciate it. My name's Josh Borson. This is my wife, Jenna Borson. Apologize in advance. My wife's a physician. She's on call. She's receiving pages right now, so if her pager goes off, apologies, but she wants to be here. And we thank you for your time. So, our current residence, as you can see on the top left of that screen, we have an attached car and a half garage that we are looking to have a 2-car garage. Based on where our lot sits compared to other houses, you cannot put a garage to either side of the house or in the backyard, because there's just not enough room because of the adjacent properties and the properties behind us to put a new garage anywhere else on our property. We've been working with a builder and an architect for a couple of months to find some way to make it work, and that is the proposal that we have in front of you today. It's marked on page number A5. So I can walk you through what our house looks like today and what we're looking to do. But ultimately, we would like to move, or to build an attached garage in front of where our garage currently sits. Obviously behind this, the front of the house line and the normal setback lines. And then repurpose space that we're eliminating from our house to the rear on the top of the screen, which is a current garage, into a mudroom, bathroom, broom closet, which is what we're eliminating to make sure that we have adequate space for a two-car garage.
Okay, Hank?
Yeah, this one was interesting because when it first came in, we thought that it needed a bunch of variances, and then we got some plan clarifications, and it doesn't. So, let me just go through this. The height of this is no change. The front yard is required is 25 feet, proposed is 31. And the side yards, which are minimum 5, total 14. They have 6 one side and 18.6 total, but it still wouldn't allow them to expand their garage to the side. So what they've done is they've slid the garage forward and they've usurped the space where the garage was sitting in order to make their house still work and still have the same amenities, yet get their house to be a little bit wider. If you take a look and you see, let me get to this one here, because it shows where the garage, let's see, one quick second. Okay, so right here, if you take a look at this right here and you can see where my cursor is, that's a porch that's there now. So by moving this up and over, what happens is they pick up enough room to get a two-car garage in there. So, but in order to do that, this has to be reconfigured. So what's happening is that they're doing this. So the space that would have been behind, which is part of the regular garage, is now part of the house. And this is your entryway in through here. They're showing that they've got a mudroom over here, broom closet here, pick up the bathroom and the laundry behind that, and then enter into the house from that. So it's a cleaner, crisper way to go ahead and do this. You'll notice the garage is set back from the front of the house, so it meets the requirements for that. The garage comes in at 647 square feet, which is less than the 650 that's required. Your lot coverage we showed originally, and we thought there was going to be a variance, but I'm showing it at 30%, which is allowed is 2,812, and it shows it proposed at 27.9, which is 2,614 square feet. And it also shows them under the maximum house size because of the configuration for the garage and the alteration at 2,396. So we have, so they're okay with all their criteria. And for some reason, we had it 2812, but I'm showing that on the bottom on the math, it came out at 2731 square feet allowed. But there's, in any case, they are under what the maximum house size is.
Hank,
So-
can you go through the maximum house size
Yeah, that's how, I'm gonna.
calculation? Because I think height is in there and that might not.
Well, the
not
height
co-
is 2,600, that's where our difference is.
Okay,
So you take the height out, because at 2731, you take the 150 out, it drops it down, but they're still under. So originally, we calculated the height, and the reason that we gave it to it originally, and we didn't take it out, was because the height didn't change. The height of the addition is less. So they picked up the height codicil for that, because what they were doing, the height of the house is the same, they're not changing the height of the house, and the addition is less than 26 feet. So that's why they got the 150 for that. 250 for the architectural details, and a 281 square foot lot bonus because they have a big lot. It's a 9,375 square foot lot, which is 1.5 platted lots, 75 by 125 in that particular area. So if you go on to the houses that they have for the lots next door, one neighbor is 50 by 125 and it's 6250's lot. Their house size is 2394. The subject property is 2396 and the west neighbor is 2077. Stories on the one to the west is 1.25, 1.75 at the subject property and 1.5 at the east neighbor. So basically they're all, not too far apart in the square footage and they're not too far apart in the height as far as what they have. And the exterior material on this house is brick and siding. The neighbors on either side of them have brick. And this car already has an attached garage, which is why they didn't get the bonus for it, and they're building the attached garage, which creates that. But other than that, that's kind of where we're at with this. we didn't have any real problem with it. The garage has a window on the side of it, so they did put a window in that, and it shows that they also have another window, so there's two, one right by the exit. And the doorway is significant in size, it's an 18-foot door, so that gives them, perforations on the front of the elevation. And with the windows on the side, that actually was pretty good for that, but it's not a living space. Other than that, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer it. I'm sure Mr. Borison and his wife would answer us to the best of their ability as well.
Hank, before we get started,
Yeah.
going back to the house size, what
Yeah.
are the bonuses that, besides the lot
Okay,
bonus?
so the bonuses they got the lot bonus, we gave them the roof height bonus because their addition was not taller than the 26 feet. We did not give them the fenestration bonus, we did not give them the attached garage bonus, we gave them $250 for that. So, and then we gave them the second floor stepped in. So we had, let me just go back to the math on that. So we gave them 281, 150 architectural details, so that's 3, that's 4 with the architectural details, 281, plus that is 681 total square feet, so 20 net plus, so 681 plus the 1900 was 2581, so 2581. Which is how we got to the 2581 figure on the maximum permitted. And then we had the proposed.
So what architectural details are we counting?
The architectural details for the garage were roll locks, and they had soldier coursing, and what was the other one here? Let's see. Wood windows.
Can you
Side-
confirm that you have wood windows?
Yep.
And that was the ones that we had. They needed 3 and they had 3.
All right, start with Gail.
Okay, basically what you're taking is the side of the house and moving it to the back of the house where the garage sits and moving the garage forward to move this behind the garage. I'm noticing in your plans that in the basement, there's gonna be a basement underneath part of the garage. In the basement plans, what are you doing in the back? Is that gonna be on a slab or a crawl space, or are you putting a basement in the back?
No, we're not touching the basement. The basement, anything where the garage is and backwards is all crawl space, if anything. We're not building anything over existing livable space.
And the covered porch is being taken away, and there is not going to be a covered porch at the garage there any longer. The garage is going to come all the way to the front, as it shows,
Correct,
just a little bit step back.
correct.
Okay. No other questions?
I don't have any questions either. I looked at it a couple of times and thought, at first I didn't really entirely understand what you guys were doing. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's pretty clever. I think it's a smart use of space. I think it's a tidy solution to meet the standards of the city, and I have no further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm similar. When I first saw it, I thought, I don't necessarily love the design of houses where the garage is like jutting out from the front of the house. I thought this was a really nice fix because you're not doing that. There's still a setback. It fits nicely within the design of the house. I have no concerns. It's a nice design.
Chris?
No, I don't have any questions as well.
No issues.
No issues here.
Hank, only one question from me.
Yes, sir.
I don't think we got a survey with this. Is that correct?
You should have, but the survey meets, that's where we got our lot coverages and everything off of. So this is what we have here. I can pass it around, but this is what we got and we use to do that. But it meets our requirements.
Okay, and follow-up question, do we have a standard for setback of the garage from the front of the house?
It has to be it has to be behind the front of the house.
Just behind, there's not a set
It's not a
distance?
set distance.
Okay. Then just to clarify, all materials match existing?
Yeah,
The materials
so
will match
the,
existing?
where the, kind of where the, in front of the porch is now, all the brick, we're gonna repurpose it and move it to the other side of the house. Just so it all matches, and otherwise, we're not changing anything aesthetically to the exterior.
Okay.
Who's doing the work?
Jack Khalifi, Jack Jobs.
He's done actually a lot of projects in the city.
Okay, any other questions? All right, looking for a motion?
I'll move to approve the plan as proposed.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Two-car garage.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, something you can call now on top.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Would you like these back?
Well, Should we take them? or-
You want 7 copies?
Well,
We have,
It is almost
wait, we
bonfire
might
season.
actually, do we need them for the zoning meeting?
No.
okay.
You're okay.
All right. We'll call.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Was there a zoning requirement?
They meet all the zoning requirements.
Or they meet?
There was a misconception.
I just wondered why he asked.
Because there's a misconception. Oh, that's why I was gonna call Phil tomorrow. He doesn't need to do anything he needs to do.
My sister lived next door.
Okay, so, at this point, Mr. Chair, Okay. Mr. Chair, at this point, I'd like to introduce Kristen Cole. Kristen, who comes to us from Rosati Schultz Job at Knapsbuechler, and I did get that right, didn't I?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, it's hard to say. So Kristen's here, basically what we wanted to do is, because whenever we have an ordinance like this, that's of this magnitude, we'd like to have some representation here, so if we have questions, concerns about the ordinance, anything from why definitions to whatever. Some of you have already sent me some information on that, which I did pass on to Kristen to take a look at, and she's incorporated some of it into the new ordinance. So what we'd like to do here is, the goal tonight would be to get the questions answered or concerns answered, or at least out there, and set it for public hearing for the next meeting. At the point that there's a public hearing, we can go ahead then and take any comments from the public and whatever. This was on the agenda for tonight as well, so the public certainly is welcome to comment on it, and that's why we do this. We want to have it available at all times. This was on the website as it was in the form. So I'm going to let Kristen go ahead and explain it, and if there's any questions or comments for that, we'll try to answer them right now.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me fill in for Carol. She's off at a family wedding, so she got the better end of the deal. So this is obviously a very comprehensive rewrite of the city's sign ordinance. It looks like, looking at your code online, it looks like there were some updates made in 2018, which came after the case of, which came after the case of, Carol, 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 Car Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which was a United States Supreme Court opinion that really sort of changed the way municipalities can regulate signs. I don't know if that's ever come up in this group. That case dealt with a church and their temporary signs that they placed throughout the community to let the community know when their worship services were. And they were regulated in such a way by this town in Arizona that very quickly they began to be ticketed by the community because they had these signs out in excess of the time that was allowed for temporary signs. This Supreme Court case was decided in 2015, and essentially what it said is that every sign is subject to strict scrutiny, meaning that the local municipality has to prove that their regulations furthers a compelling interest and is narrowly tailored to achieve whatever that interest is. What that means is essentially every sign ordinance that is challenged is going to be looked at very closely by a court to make sure that the local government is not regulating the content of the sign, whether it be advertising where your worship services are, advertising your commercial business, making a political statement. Your local ordinance has to be crafted in such a way that you're not violating anybody's First Amendment rights. So one of the ways that local governments have been changing their ordinance to do is to make sure that it's very clearly stated what the local government's interests are. And that's why you see this lengthy purpose and intent statement at the beginning of this proposed ordinance. Identifying the interests of the community. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that Huntington Woods doesn't look like Las Vegas with bright signs and tall signs and big signs and flashing signs. So it sets out in great detail and goes on, I'm sure you noticed, for more than a page of what this city's interested in regulating signs and, which ties back to aesthetics. So that's part of the reason that that's done. You also see a very long definition section so that it's very clear for anybody looking at your ordinance and wanting to install a new sign, what types of signs are covered and how the city views exactly what those different types of signs are. So then your ordinance, this proposed ordinance goes into great detail about, what signs are exempt to make sure that you're not infringing on anybody's First Amendment rights by requiring somebody to get a permit to say, support a political candidate or a political cause, or some other ideological expression that they would like to make. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at anything. I will try to answer any questions that I can. Obviously, Carol is the one that drafted this ordinance, so I will do my best if you have any questions.
If I could add a couple things, Mr. Chair. I did want to point out that this ordinance is crafted and has been tested in other communities. So this is not something where Huntington Woods is going to be the test case for this. I think there's, 2 other communities using this ordinance that Carol mentioned?
That sounds right, and I know there's probably half a dozen more that are also in the process of considering it.
Right. And part of the thing with this is that by making temporary signs limits the amount of time that any temporary sign can be on a property. Being, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christian, on any of this, but it limits the time, whether it's a political sign, whether it's a for sale sign, not for sale signs, but for any of the other types of signs that people like, pipeline, whatever, anything, any other types of signs that would be considered temporary signs. So those signs would be covered under this ordinance, whereas before they weren't. And that was it. The other thing that I think we regulate is size of the signs So when you go through this, that's another thing to consider as to what the size can be, so that basically somebody can't put a billboard on the front lawn. And this helps to do that. One other thing that I did want to point out, and Kristen, I don't know if you can weigh in on this or not, but we do have something here that was added specifically for Huntington Woods, which is art installations, sculptures, murals, posters, and paintings on the exterior of a building. That can be, whether it's signs or whether it's murals like they just put up at Monarch, or it can be on the side of a building on Woodward, or it can be something of that nature to art in the front of people's yards, like sculptures, that type of thing. So there was one that was put in our, and the reason is because as ordinances are not, they fluctuate with times. And as things come up, you add, you subtract, you see what works, you see what doesn't work. But this has attracted enough attention to the point where it was added in by our city attorney for that, after a discussion. Part of the reason is that because, like for example, the Monarch sign, while the actual sign that says Monarch is not that big, it's part of the bigger mural. So do you just count the sign? Do you count the mural? Do you even go there? So those are kind of the things that we have. So if you take a look at it, it says art or art pieces may be allowed at the discretion of the zoning administrator. That means if it looks like it's part of that, it's treated as signs subject to the requirements of the ordinance. If it's advertising a particular brand or business, if it's just specifically, if it's art, then it's art. But if it's advertising something and it becomes part of a logo, part of a general bigger picture, then it becomes a sign, and the whole thing becomes a sign. So that's kind of where that was going with that. You'll notice a lot of things with this too, is that what we've done with the definitions, there's now graphics for everything. So it shows you what kind of sign is what, because it's unfair to assume that everybody understands what kind of signs there are and what they are. So she's gone out of her way to actually show what kind of signs there are. And as you go through, you'll see like entryway signs, we've crossed that out, festoons type of things, flags. These are like temporary things that somebody might do for business. For example, if one of our commercial entities is having a sale, I don't know what like Chase would have on sale, but they have an event or something like that. It tells what they have, so we call it out, so we try to catch every single kind of sign that there is, so that we know when they come in, do they need a permit, do they not need a permit? Is this a temporary thing, or is this something that they have to have addressed? So this is what goes on, and I actually think that, what we have is on the threshold of a real cutting-edge sign ordinance. And then, so, the other thing I wanted to talk about real quick, and then I'll let it be. We also limit the foot candles and everything on that, and I wanted to show that because that shows like the brightness from people being concerned about, am I gonna have some glaring kind of sign in my front window? It's not. And then it talks about non-glare shielded light, and it goes on to electronic messaging center. And where was the one section that I wanted to talk about right here? Okay, the signs exempt from permit. So this goes through everything that it has on here for the signs exempt from permits, and the importance of that particularly is that we let people know right away that you don't need a permit for these types of things. And that's a good thing, because what the whole ordinance is trying to make it so that if you read this, you understand what's going on. You'll notice a lot of things have been cut from this, and, there's been some things added, and again, you run into the art installation and stuff like that. Sign types, different types of business, different districts. It's really very comprehensive, so I've got to tell you, I think it's a big improvement from what we have. I know that Sheldon's weighed in on some concerns and questions that he had, and Kristen has incorporated those into here. Our goal with this is to have some discussion, make sure your questions get answered. Again, set it for public hearing where the public gets to weigh in on it, and you get another chance to weigh in on it. So don't feel like you have to catch everything tonight. So other than that, Mr. Chair, if you have any questions from the commission or the public, or, we can do that.
I have a couple questions. So what is the existing ordinance on this? Did we,
Well, the existing ordinance, which goes into, and I can get it for you here. The existing ordinance was not as comprehensive as this. Okay, let's go here. Okay. Okay, so this is what our sign ordinance looks like now. So the intent, if you take a look at it, there's still an intent. The construction of the ordinance is the same, but if you take a look at this, there's far less meat and potatoes with this ordinance. The other thing that you'll notice with it right now is that we don't have the graphics like we had in that. That's it. That's the entire ordinance.
I'm just wondering though, like, was there something that prompted us to want to revise it? Like, has this been an issue for us?
It's been an issue only with the duration of the temporary signs, and particularly with the political signs and them staying up forever and forever. There's at least an opportunity here to address that, and this wasn't entirely crafted to deal with political signs, but there's a number of signs, as you can see, that we did address with this, and also we wanted to make this extremely comprehensive, and the purpose of that is that so somebody that's not familiar with it can understand exactly what it is that we're trying to do here. So this is where it started here. I mean, you can see just by the length of it and the intent statement and everything like that, that this is much more significant than what we've had in the past.
The list of exempt signs also is much longer in this proposed ordinance. I'm looking at your ordinance right now. There's nothing, the current list of exempt signs is 4, and none of them are political signs, which is one of the most protected expressions of speech under the state and federal constitutions. And yet, under your current ordinance, it's not even addressed as being an exempt sign, whereas in this draft ordinance, it's addressed actually twice, both as a temporary sign and then specifically under sub 15, non-commercial messages including religious, political, economic, social, etc.
What about like those like birthday signs everyone puts out now, like on their lawns?
Those would probably fall under temporary signs. I have a little bit of experience with those. Typically, they're up for 24 hours. They put them in overnight, they're up for the day, and then they're gone. So I think that would be a temporary sign.
Okay.
I haven't seen a situation where they've been out for an extended period of time.
Or like the flamingos on the lawn or something like that. We do get
Yeah.
that, and you're right, Joe, we do get that. The other signs that we get around here is like if the parents have a son or daughter in the band, or in a sport, they'll have their name out there with that, and we've just never done anything with that. They're not out there, they're only out there for a short period of time during a truncated season, and those are just,
They'd be considered temporary.
yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? So, and this is, maybe I'm missing it, but I'm thinking about someone who decides they want to put up, holiday lights for the better part of the year, or they want to leave their Halloween stuff and the smoke and the lights, and it's driving the neighbors crazy. Is that a scenario where that person could say, well, I'm an artist and this is my expression, and now it's at the discretion of the zoning administrator? Or is that pretty clear cut? I read this already, and I'm just starting to think of the potential slippery slopes here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess theoretically, is that a sign or a decoration? I mean,
It's an artwork.
yeah,
So the other thing with that too is that the way that we would address that is not only necessarily as a sign, it wouldn't necessarily be under the sign ordinance, but it could fit the nuisance ordinance. If they've got like a smoke machine on the front lawn and a dragon that breathes fire until 3 o'clock in the morning, that would fall under a public nuisance, and we would enforce that as such. If nobody complained about it, then it's not a public nuisance. If somebody does, like, leaves their Christmas lights up, those are lights, that's not a sign. Also, the lights and holiday lights, that's our religious expression and a religious freedom that we would think very clearly about.
That begs the question, though, on the art installation, like, is there anything regulating, what if somebody wants to put a sculpture on their lawn?
There's nothing regulating that currently.
Because this art installation is defined specifically for something that's promoting a business. So if somebody wanted to just have commissioned some artists to make some,
We have those in the city.
Well, or one that's illuminated too, that's a whole different thing, right?
So if depending on if it becomes illuminated and how it's set up, it could be a problem, but by the very nature of art, and I'll just point to, for example, there's a house on Huntington that's had art out in front of it since I've been a little kid, and that's long ago. But in any case, that's been there. That's part of the art. That's part of the house. That's part of the ambiance of the thing. I have had absolutely zero complaints in the last 20 years about art on the lawn. I have had many complaints about signs. So I think that that's why we're falling into the sign category, but because art can extend to painting, to mural, to that type of thing, I think that's where the art came into the sign ordinance. And again, Kristen, if you have any other thoughts on that.
I was just gonna say, the art only becomes a sign if it's advertising something. So if it is, then yes, it's subject to the requirements of this ordinance. If it's literally just a sculpture or artistic, then it would not be.
I mentioned this at the last time we went through this partly, and that is when you're dealing with temporary signs, and I'm going to make it specifically for real estate for sale signs. Okay, it now reads that it can be up for the length of the listing, and then 65, which is longer than it used to be, 65 days after, it's sold or whatever else. But what concerns me there is twofold. One, that it says that temporary signs have to be 5 feet back from the property line. And that's a problem with real estate signs, especially if you're putting what's called a take me box on a real estate sign. If you put that sign 5 feet back onto a person's lawn, if somebody wants to go get that information that's on the sign out of the box, they've got to trek through the snow or whatever else or onto the person's lawn. So it's usually pretty close to this, not overhanging the sidewalk, but close enough to the sidewalk that you're just stepping off it, taking something and so on. So I have a problem with temporary signs having to be that far back. Also, when you're dealing with, did you want to?
No, go ahead,
Also, when you're dealing with A-frame signs or whatever else, open house signs that are just temporarily put out there, the ordinance, and we all know what it reads, but that's not, hopefully, once upon a time it was enforced, that open signs can't be on the public right-of-way. And it's sometimes very hard at a corner or something like that to get a sign onto a person's property. And if you do it on their side of it, it makes them think that their house is for sale, and then they get, people coming up to their door. So usually it's at the right-of-way between the street and the sidewalk for directional signs for open houses. And I think that we need to be inclusive for allowing that kind of use. And then the third thought that I had is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, is in the current ordinance, did builders have to take out a permit to put up a special sign, not like a sign like a for sale sign that they're there, but like, for example, on Ludlow?
They get a permit for it. They have a permit.
And they have to pay for the permit
Pay for
to
the
do it, and how long those can be up for, whatever, like the house that's being constructed on Ludlow with the drawing of the house that's going up, what are the ordinances on that?
They pay in 30-day increments for that sign to be up there.
Okay,
That's how we currently do it.
that's what I thought, that commercial, signs had to be permitted, but real estate signs, by real estate companies did not.
Yeah, the other thing too that you bring up, and that's a good point, because this part will be a good discussion. The idea that you would have to trespass onto somebody's property to get a take me brochure, we might want to look at that, or I don't think we can treat the real estate signs any different than any other signs. So that's why that is. So either the 5 feet has to go away, or the take me boxes have to go away. And on the sign, typically what we see sometimes is a website that they can go to get the information on the house. So that's one of the things that you have to decide with that. The city owns 1 foot inside the sidewalk. So the maximum that it could be is, or the minimum that it could be is at least 1 foot. And the reason for that is that, we all know that we have the brushes that go down the sidewalks. If it's any closer than that, I promise you the machines will hit them. And so that's part of the reason for the signs too. So the 5 feet, I don't know whether that's just a non-negotiable or whether that figure was, it's not arbitrary, because Carroll never does anything arbitrary. So it's going to be one of those things where it's worked in other communities, it's been tested in other communities. So the thing would be is whether you decide whether you want to let it be closer than that or not closer than that. That's the one thing. And the other thing that Gail brought up was as far as the signs in the right-of-ways, the problem with the signs in the right-of-ways has been the open signs for open houses, which are typically on Sundays between 1 and 4. We just have never really enforced that, because the realtors go pick up their signs when they're done and they put them in their car and they go away. So it's like a limited 4-hour, 5-hour thing as far as that. And the realtors typically don't leave the signs out there because that's their signs. They pay for those, they keep their property. We really haven't had a problem with it. We've had more of a problem with the proliferation of like garage sale signs and that right away in people's property, in public property. So again, that's why we have a no, bill posting in public property ordinance. And that's worked pretty well, because, there's times that when we weren't looking at it, or at times when it wasn't enforced, that we've come back with a whole code car full of signs. And everything from the masonry ones to the mattress sales, you've seen them all as you drive around. The brick cleaning, sewer cleaning, they're just all over, and they're typically on the perimeter of the city. So that's why we don't want that. Now, do we have civic events that we put in the right-of-way? Yes, we do. Like when we had the master plan, we put signs out for the master plan and public property, and we had no problems with that. We picked them up after the event, and that was the thing. But those are city signs on city property. This is private signs on city property. Like Gail says, and I can certainly agree with that, that it's out for a limited period of time. So that's clearly about as temporary a sign as you get, but it's on city property. So the question to you then, Kristen, becomes, is that different than on private property?
And there's also the men's club that puts their signs out for the auction.
Yeah, and do we have to, again, that's somewhat considered a civic event because the funds from that go to the city. But for the real estate signs, so the private signs, it's a private sign, it's private business on public property. So I guess what the question is that should we address that further in the ordinance or the proposed ordinance, or should we status quo with that?
So there's a provision in here that says no signs in the public right-of-way,
Right.
period.
Right.
So that's sort of your default provision. The city has the right to enforce or not enforce that, as the occasion fits. The problem is when you start making exceptions,
Well,
the exceptions start to swallow the rule, and then you start to look like you're playing favorites, or, you're just not enforcing it, and so everybody's gonna start putting their signs out.
well, we take them if they're in the right of way as of now. The only thing, if it's not a city or city-sponsored event, we take them. The thing with the realtors is that we've always done that, because otherwise, how do the realtor signs that are on the right of way can be considered a benefit to the residents because you're helping residents sell their houses, move their houses, that. So while that may be stretching it, and admittedly so, it's always been allowed because the people that are selling their house or people that are looking for houses, these are our current, past, present, and future residents of the city. So there's a civic interest in that, and that's kind of why we allowed the signs for the realtors on like a Sunday from, if it's 1 to 4, noon to 5.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation, and we can certainly talk about this further, would not be to put an exception in the ordinance, especially not for a commercial,
To just enforce it as
Operation.
we're doing now because of our interpretations.
right?
Because realistically, at this, like with such like this, is that unless somebody would challenge an interpretation that I would make as a zoning administrator for the city, I'm able to interpret the ordinance and the intent of the ordinance, and the intent of the ordinance for like the real estate signs might be to help our past, present, and future residents of the city.
Yeah, because on the spectrum of protections for speech,
Right.
I mean, commercial speech is sort of at the bottom end of the pile. And that's really, when you're talking about selling a house, that's a commercial business, right? That it's a financial transaction that somebody's gonna benefit from, a private individual, versus, supporting a political candidate, which has the most protection under First Amendment law. So if you're gonna start if you put an exception in your ordinance for realtors, the mattress people are gonna show up and say, well, wait a minute, I'm also a private commercial business, why don't I get the exception in the ordinance? And then, again, that snowballs, and pretty soon, there's no exception.
Which is why I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, and if you guys have anything to weigh in on this with, please. But that's why I'm thinking is because at least with the realtor sign, there is a benefit to a past, present, or future resident. If it's Bob's cement contractor, there's no benefit to the past, present, or future resident. So I do think there's a difference in the type of sign that it is. I don't know that you can treat them any differently, but then again, I don't know that the zoning ordinance binds us on public property.
Sheldon, want to weigh in?
Sheldon. Sure, thank you. My comment on that particular is we can't let the perfect stand in the way of the good, and I would suggest that we leave the prohibition on commercial signs in the public right-of-way where it is, and if that means that there's going to be some enforcement judgments made, then that's what it means. If somebody's offended enough by that, they'll go to the courthouse. I am not necessarily comfortable with a judgment that says this is a possible benefit to past, present, and future residents of the city. That's a pretty slippery standard and is subject, in my view, this is not a personal criticism of you, but it's certainly something that can be, it's a moving target from time to time and doesn't give anybody, the reason behind this is to give somebody clear notice of what's permitted and not permitted, okay? I mean, I recognize that there's value to the city to have realtor signs available, and whether or not something of a certain size should be permitted even in the public right-of-way, that doesn't mean in the middle of the street, to advertise an open house or something like that, perhaps that can be addressed. But this thing is already complex enough. I wouldn't want to make it any more complex than it already is. I've got a couple more questions, if I can. Where's the duration limit on temporary signs? Where's that located?
There isn't one. They are an exempt sign, so there is no,
Except there's size limitations and that sort of, so I don't know what exempt means in that circle.
exempt means it doesn't need a permit from the city to install.
Okay, so there's no specific definition of duration as far as a temporary sign.
Right,
There's-
it's just exempt
All
from the
right,
permit
there's a lot of
requirement.
signs around the city that refer, I guess they could be regarded as political, but, you know, all lives matter and peace is important and Black Lives Matter and, you know, hate has no place here. There's tons of them around the city. Where do those fit in here? Are those political expression?
So, yeah, there's also under exempt sign, meaning no permit required. Signs displaying non-commercial messages such as religious, political, economic, social, philosophical, or other types of speech protected by the First Amendment.
Okay.
However, said signs shall comply with the number and size for the zoning district. So a residential property is going to have a limit on the number and size of signs they could place in their front yard.
Okay.
Does it also have a maintenance standard to that sign?
There may be under the zoning ordinance,
Yeah, we have.
the district regulations.
Yeah, and there's also, under the International Property Maintenance Code.
I think it might make sense though on the temporary, because there are signs that are, you know, up there, like they never come down. So are they considered temporary even if they're not affixed to the house? I mean, they're not, but they're been up there, you know, maybe there does make sense to add some duration to the definition of a temporary sign.
Kristen, that's gonna be a you, because if you have like, if we're considering, religious, political, and that as temporary signs, as soon as we put a duration limit on it, then don't we run afoul of the First Amendment?
Yes, although I have seen durational limits on temporary signs advertising a specific event. For instance, you know,
Garage sale.
bingo night at the Knights of Columbus on Tuesday, September 26th. Okay, so the event's tonight. They can't have a sign advertising that's up for, you know, 30, 45 days after the fact.
I think where the planning commission is going is specific signs, and I think everybody that lives here knows what signs they are. They're the signs that Sheldon was referencing. They're the signs that might be like, you know, pipeline 5, no fracking, this, that, and the other thing. Those signs, which are clearly different than, you know, Bob's mattress sale and, you know, the other types of signs. These signs are actually on residences, on private property, as opposed to the signs that we see at the perimeter on public property.
Yeah, that's definitely a tougher thing to try to regulate because it is a philosophical, non-commercial message, political, whatever the message is. It's really difficult to put a restriction on that in an ordinance and have that withstand scrutiny by a court.
Why couldn't you, and this is a real question, it's not why couldn't you put a duration on, a limit on non-exempt signs? Why couldn't you limit it that way?
How do you know when it first went out?
Yeah, so I have a question.
Yeah,
That's an
I've been thinking
enforcement
about this.
question, that doesn't.
So so Sheldon, you had a couple comments. Let's
Yeah.
get through Sheldon's
Well,
first and
that
then
was-
go
That was one of
around.
my questions. Also, on page 18 of this novel that we've got in front of us, it talks about prohibited signs. You've got identified on page 18, numbers 3 and 4, animated signs, displays flashing. Why wouldn't, as a drafting matter, since you've already got animated signs defined in B1B, okay, which is back on page, let me find it.
Page 18, what number were you at, Shel? 3?
Pardon me?
3 and 4.
Page 4. You've got animated signs defined. Why wouldn't you why leave room for different words in different places if you mean the same thing? Why not just a cross-reference to B1B?
Well, B1B is a definition,
Okay,
so it's calling out here that these things are prohibited.
Okay.
And there's a difference between animated signs, which typically means like words moving across a screen, versus a sign that has, you know, the flashing lights or, you know, something else going.
Well, I don't think that's properly set out here. I know that you define animated signs, but the definitions in prohibited signs, unless they include everything that's an animated sign, and they seem to have a lot of crossover there, I don't know what you're exempting. Stuff with rolling text are already separately, I think separately defined and separately permitted with limitations and requiring permitting and that sort of stuff. I just don't understand why there is any necessity to redefine or parse out something that's already defined in the ordinance. I don't know, I don't understand why the exceptions, I don't understand why, I'm really articulate tonight, aren't I? I don't understand why the prohibited sign prohibition is any different, applies to something other than the animated signs that are defined in
We should just use the defined
B1B.
term.
That's my point.
Yeah.
I'm
Sheldon, is that something you could put in writing?
I do have,
Okay.
because he sent in comments, so I do have that. I have not been able to discuss it with Carol, who was the drafter.
Okay.
To see if she has
Would
a
it be
specific
fair-
reason.
Would it be fair to then, we'll broach that question prior to the public hearing? We'll broach that
guess I-
question with Carol and then come to some kind of, resolution.
Yeah,
as to whether-
I'm just looking for, I'm just looking for some
a consistency.
smart lawyer trying to parse, if there's a difference in what you're saying, this is or is not a prohibited sign. Because it doesn't include revolving or rotating, or it's flashing, animation, scrolling. I don't know what all of the ramifications of animated, but you've got a whole bunch of them. Flashing, scintillating, intermittent, oscillating, visible, mechanical movement, yada, yada, yada. Okay, I'm just looking for why those separations are being made, and I'm willing to accept an explanation. I just don't know what it is. Also, down in number 20 on that same page, you talk about feather signs. I don't know what a feather sign is, and it's one of the few things that isn't defined in this ordinance. I guess
A feather sign is, like, have you ever seen it goes like this, like stop here and it's just
Yeah,
one.
they're typically really tall with just like a real
like a
narrow,
small
long
arc.
flag.
but there's no illustration.
It's fabric.
You'll see them at like soccer tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
have
a
an
fabric.
idea of what it might be, but, okay.
So Sheldon, that comment's been shared previously as well?
Yeah,
Or-
they
and-
were sent along to
Okay.
me.
So
Looking it up.
they
Yeah.
have them, and part of this is too, and I'm gonna kind of, explain a little bit here. When we get these, and then we ask for comments, Shell sends in comments, then it goes to Rosati Schultz to take a look at. A lot of times, if they have time to get to it, they'll get to it and they'll do it. Chris has addressed some of Shell's comments in here already. There are certain things that they may want to discuss on a wider basis, which would mean that Kristen would talk to Carol Rosati, who is the city attorney, and then get a definitive answer for that. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's something that we could probably have for the next meeting for the public hearing, so that in the next copy, we would have an adjustment for that. That's something that could be highlighted, so that we can see that we've either addressed it or have a reason why we did not. Is that fair? Okay.
I have two additional questions. One is, one's a drafting comment, page 28. There's still a reference that I think should have been, it's highlighted in blue under F. Probably should have been deleted, because there is no 38 that I'm aware of that's applicable. And finally, what's the difference between an awning and a canopy?
So an awning is typically a cloth structure that comes off a building, and it would have text like screen printed on it. A canopy is typically, and I saw one and I almost took a picture of it to bring because I knew I had your comments. And a canopy is, sometimes it's built out of the same material as the building, so it might be like a steel or an aluminum. They're typically flat, and they jut out over the entrance to a building and would have text on it. Does that make sense?
Permanent, or
No, they're both permanent.
talking about the text?
Well, it would be attached. In that case, it would be, in the case of a canopy, it would be like screwed into it. I mean, obviously, it couldn't be screen printed. I suppose it could be painted, but the one I saw over the weekend, it was like brass letters or numbers that were attached to this canopy structure.
So it seems to me offhand that not a canopy, but an awning would be of some sort of flexible material, presumably,
Yep.
like a plastic or a cloth. Or
Like the screen printed awning that we have out here.
Yeah, okay, got it, that's my questions. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Elder?
Thank you. I want to go back to the temporary signs, because, you know, it's just a lot of thought. So, one, I think somebody mentioned, how would you enforce as a city, who's keeping track of how many days a temporary sign is up? So my question is, have you seen other communities do it by season or month, or, you know, is that a better way to handle? If we are going to do this,
Right.
the duration.
The last ordinance I was intimately involved with, which they still haven't adopted, it is a version of this ordinance. What they were going to do was, again, for a fixed event, like bingo at Knights of Columbus, or your primary election or your general election, any temporary signs referring to that event had to be removed, I think it was 30 days after the event. So that political candidates couldn't have their signs out, you know, for a November election into January, February, March. All other temporary signs displaying a non-commercial message, there was no limit. It would be subject to the property maintenance codes, the limits on size and number in your zoning districts, and that's it.
So
Because
I guess that's food for thought. I'm not advocating for one or the other. Because of what I've heard today, it seems like if that's the route this body is investigating on those types of signs, it seems like it would make more sense to say, like, you know, we know the November election is on this date, and so it has to be taken down within X amount of days, you know, after the election, or you can't have it up before a certain time frame. So, you know, the thing that gives me pause, I agree with Sheldon about the exceptions. I think we need to be very careful and thoughtful about that. Again, I'm not weighing one way or the other, and I understand where our realtors are coming from as well. But I think really being thoughtful, I don't know, I think I need more legal feedback on it. We have non-community groups that have put signs up on city property, and I think it goes back to what is a city resource used for? What is because city property is city resource. City computer server is city resource, so I think that has to be very clear, and if we do allow uses, there has to be guidelines set so that all of the players that are involved with utilizing a program knows what the rules are. If that makes sense. So if the rule is this needs to benefit the city, then it has to be, to me, like a city-approved function, like men's club auction makes a lot of sense, right? But if it's a commercial vendor that's just promoting their own event, like what if somebody rents a private event at the Parks and Rec building, because we do that, you can rent a room for private
Sure.
purposes, right? Are they allowed to put signage up on city property? I think there's a lot of scenarios that we should be very thoughtful about. And the exceptions piece makes me a little nervous
Okay.
because
I just want to point out that was the past, present, and future residents. That was thinking on the feet here. for
Sure,
30 seconds.
sure.
So having said that, that's just never been enforced. I mean, I've been here 20 years and that's never been enforced before I started doing it, and it was not enforced for years before that, because the realtors were always considered doing a service to the city by being able to put their signs out and selling people's houses for them. Whether or not that's right or wrong, and whether or not we have to do that, it's a fair question, as you say, to ask and see if Carol would weigh in on that, perhaps with a memo or something that we can do. Now, I know that she's out this week, right?
And next.
And next.
and let's not be too ridiculous either, right? If a private property owner like does a garage sale and they don't know the ordinance and they put it on a city right of way, like
We don't write them a ticket for that.
that's what I mean. Let's not go overboard here
We
either.
might
Let's be
take-
reasonable.
Yeah.
If you have an open house, like I would think that you would want to help people, like you were saying, sell their
Yeah.
houses, right? So I just think there needs to be a lot of thought and more legal feedback.
The purpose, it wouldn't be a bad idea to see if we could get either you or Kara, somebody from your office to weigh in on that a little bit and give us a little bit more education on what that's gonna entail.
Let me just say, the underlying reason why things are prohibited in the right-of-way is safety, right? You want to make sure that you have a clear vision when you come to an intersection, that you can see if you're turning right or left or whatever. Sometimes those structures in the right-of-way could cause greater harm in the case of an accident. They could harm a pedestrian. So at the end of the day, that's the public interest in keeping signs out of the right-of-way, safety of the motoring public, the pedestrian public. But yes, there should be uniform enforcement across the board, regardless of who's putting the sign out for what event or activity. Now, the city can use it, it's their property, but you need to keep in mind those safety concerns when anything is put in the right-of-way.
I know that Parks and, my last comment is I know that the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee have worked on this guideline for if groups or private citizens are going to use city parks, right, city property. And the event example that you gave, I think there is some opportunity to be reasonable to limit signage so that it isn't getting out of hand. So if there is an event, I don't know. I think we have to think through all of these scenarios and be very clear on what those guardrails are and just be very consistent, transparent.
Leaving whether something is beneficial or not to the community, to the judgment of the enforcement officer, strikes me as an invitation to very uneven enforcement.
That was actually one of my comments
So,
in here too. is,
having,
you know,
having said that, the way that it's worded in the proposed one, it is an enforcement officer that would determine that. The way that it is right now, it may not say it, but it still is.
Always.
It always has
Always.
been of an enforcement
Sure.
officer. So I think what they're doing is that they're illustrating in the new ordinance, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're illustrating that somebody has made a decision if that sign is allowed to remain out there, that somebody would have made a decision on it. Whether it's me, whether it's Franco, whether it's Chris, somebody with some form of competent authority would have made a decision on that. So if we decided, well, you know, the men's club is a city event, so their signs can go on city property, that's a decision that we've made for the last 40 years, you know, so I mean, there's nothing new there. I don't think it would hurt to get some additional, like an opinion from the city attorney's office saying that these are the concerns, and address the concerns in an opinion, that we would have a document to say, aha, and that may be what you're looking for.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, is legal opinion.
Is the force of law, or the force of that. And then after all, being realistic about this, if there is any challenges, or there is any violations, or is anything like that, their office is the one that's got to defend it. So, you know, it wouldn't hurt for that. So, I mean, Kristen, if that's something that you might want to take back to your office and see if that's something that possibly could be worked on. And again, I still would like to set this for public hearing. It's at the end of October. I mean, an opinion letter shouldn't take that long to generate, even if we have to wait for Carol to come back. Although I know what her desk is going to look like when she gets back. It would probably be beneficial and give us, and since signs are such a controversial ordinance anyway, it wouldn't hurt to have that and to go the extra mile to have that, because we also have to recommend this to the city commission, and the city commission, as represented here by Michelle, are going to ask these questions, so it wouldn't hurt to have that.
Are you getting complaints about like these more permanent, social
Yes.
movement signs? You are.
We're getting some complaints about signs that are not, we're getting complaints about the number of the signs, we're getting complaints about the duration of the signs, we're getting some complaints about where they're located on the property, but we're not by any stretch of the imagination getting deluged with calls or anything. I mean, you'll get once in a blue moon, or somebody will say, what's with the guy that's got 14 signs on his lawn, I mean, we'll get that, but there's not, it's more about, at times of the year with the political signs, and you'll understand this, but the political signs in Huntington Woods has always had the unspoken rule of 30 days before and 30 days after. Get them up, take them down, everybody knows what it is, and the candidates just take it down because, quite frankly, everybody lives here and they don't want their neighbors, okay, look at that, I see 1,400, Commissioner X signs, that are still out 3 months after the election. Okay, well then the next time, that might influence their vote for Commissioner X. So they get them up, they get them down, and we've not really had a problem with local elections. With elections on a more like state, regional, and presidential election, we have had some issues. And there have been signs where there's been some colorful language on some of these signs. And again, that becomes another issue.
So what specifically is the question you would like an opinion on?
How do we, I'm most concerned about signage on city property, because I see that as a city resource. But how do we, and how, if so, how do we craft something that is reasonable, transparent, consistent? And I'd like to actually refer you back to Parks and Rec, because I think the committee had worked on some language. I wonder if there's some consistency that could be applied on the limit test of benefit to the community. I think that's what you've been,
That's kind of where
that's where the origin
Yeah.
of all of this comes from. So I think I'm seeking clarity, while respecting, like, there is a logical reason why realtors would want to put open house signs on a Sunday afternoon, right? That, let's not go crazy with this, right? Like, but let's be reasonable, but set
Would it be?
parameters.
Would it be reasonable for you, or would you be satisfied if we did get the language from the Parks and Rec about signage? They have signage regulations. See, we don't get to see any of that stuff.
I don't think it's a regulation, it's just a guideline of using
Right.
city parks, yeah.
Right, so city parks, and you're talking about the city parks transitioning into city property.
Well, it is city property.
No, but what we're talking about is people aren't putting signs in parks, they're putting them in the right of way between the sidewalk and the curb.
Right, that's,
So-
yeah, it's still the same idea of does it benefit
The
the
concept.
community?
Okay, so I can get that information and get it to your office. We do have some time before we can do that. That might help with the opinion. Do you get what she wants for her opinion?
I think so.
Okay. Sheldon, you also had some concerns that you want addressed. Did you have anything for?
No, I mean, I'm happy to expound on it, but I think I've made my concerns clear. Do we have a property maintenance code?
We have the International Property Maintenance Code that the city adopts and that we follow.
Supply to signs?
There are signs in the code.
It does apply to signs.
It can. It depends on how you're applying it. If there's a sign that's dilapidated,
Okay.
or one that obstructs vision or something like that, there's all kinds of codes other than just the code. There's a vehicular code, there's chapter 36. There's the International Property Maintenance Code. There's all kinds of codes that something could fall under, hypothetically.
Okay.
So I'm going to say we'll go around the table one last time tonight for any questions. And then we're ultimately looking for a motion to set the public hearing date.
Right, and at that point in time, here's where I want to give you some degree of comfort, okay? When we have that and it's set for a public hearing, we're bringing you back more information than you had this time on specific concerns that you have. And I think we've made a lot of progress going through a very extensive ordinance. So the questions that you've asked tonight, it's our intent to answer them prior to the meeting. If you don't feel that they've been answered sufficiently, at that point in time, when you have the public hearing, you can table it, you can, postpone it, you can vote on it, you can basically run it up the flagpole and see who salutes it, but the goal would be is to make sure that you're comfortable with it. So it would be the intent of staff to get the answers to the questions that you've asked to you prior to the next meeting so that you'll feel comfortable with it. It may not agree with everything that you have, and it may be that the city attorney says, I like the idea and concept, however, you can't do it, and this is why. And I think that would satisfy anybody if you have that. Even if it's a no, you can't do this, and this is why.
Okay.
Would that be fair enough?
Okay, Gail?
Okay, on page 6, entranceway signs is crossed off, but specifically, it looks like the City of Huntington Woods sign that's right in front of the City Hall over here, and yet it's specifically addressing a development consisting of multiple uses, parcels, lots, and so on. I'm wondering, that's not really what an entranceway sign is, you know, the way it's showing it, we have an entranceway sign on City Hall.
City property would be exempt from the zoning ordinance.
But the definition is still a definition. I don't know that an entranceway sign is just limited to development of multiple users, parcels, lots, and so on. I think that the definition is a definition, but I think it's too specific in that, is just what I'm trying to refer to. That's why
So
it was
do you-
taken out.
Are you proposing to keep that definition?
Well, if we're giving definitions, I just think that we define what an entranceway sign might be, you know, It's an entranceway signs are integrated into freestanding walls, columns, boulders, or other distinguishing features unique to the, to the development or to its placement or location.
So I think the intent behind this particular sign is, I come from the west side, if you will, and they're doing large subdivision developments, right? Self-contained, planned unit developments, and at the entrance to each of those, they have an entranceway sign that is typically brick, stone, something, and it has the name, Hickory Creek, or whatever it might be. I think that's what this definition is getting at, and I don't think Huntington Woods has any of these large subdivision developments that are specifically named, like,
We have not.
We have, what's the one on 11 and Woodward, on the corner? Doesn't it say City of Huntington Woods?
Yeah, it's just.
Right, well, that's what I'm just
Is that
trying
an
to say.
entryway?
I'm saying don't eliminate the definition,
got it.
eliminate the purpose at Thrifty Florist or over here. I just think that it serves a definition. Going back to the issue of temporary signs or real estate signs in the right-of-way or whatever else, the other person that typically might use a right-of-way sign, and I think if you deal with the safety of placement, and again, it's the enforcer who decides whether they're gonna pick up the signs or not, is, sometimes, there's a House of Shiva, and they have valet parking, and they'll have a valet parking sign on a, awning sign kind of thing in front of the house so that people can drop off their car.
We wouldn't touch that at all.
I know, but I'm just saying, it's not just a real estate sign that's going there. There are other purposes of when that type of sign gets put out. My last thing is on page 26. I just want to understand what the Planning Commission is being called upon to do is review of an application to issue a permit. It says sign permit applications are submitted in conjunction with the proposed construction of a new development building or addition to an existing building or so on, and shall be reviewed by the Planning Commission as part of the required site plan review. It's not very often that when we get something here, we get the sign with it also. If somebody's building a new house like they did over on the house on
And that's-
Ludlow.
And that's not a permanent sign. What this is addressing is like, if you have a site plan coming in, let's say a building on Woodward gets knocked down. You have a new building coming up, the sign that goes on the new building would also come to the planning commission as a package.
Okay.
That's what it would be, so it's not now where we can take a look at it in a different manner. And if somebody wants to change out a sign or something like that, it doesn't come, this is cohesive, so if we have a building that's coming in, we know what the signage is gonna be.
Okay.
You have a look at the signage at the time that it comes, at the time that the whole project is
Okay,
presented.
so it's the signage for the building that's going there. Because number 2 just says, if it's not us, it's you that does it, and you get to review it.
That's what we're doing now.
Okay, that was it.
Okay, Blake,
I have nothing further.
Jill,
I am good.
Chris?
I mean, just coming back to the real estate signs, and more, not so much for the open houses, but kind of to the point of, for safety and trying to move it closer to the sidewalk. You spoke, line of sight, pedestrians, vehicle traffic. I would have concern about that, moving that closer. As somebody that runs and walks in this city almost every day, that's a concern of mine, for sure. So,
Sheldon?
nothing more.
Commissioner Elder?
I'm good, thank you.
So, items that I would like some follow-up on is enforcement. What are the stages of enforcement? Does it start with a warning, and then what are the fines beyond that? I know that's identified somewhere in our ordinances, and that's what this is referring to. So I'd like to review that. There's also some language in here in regards to insurance requirements for signage erectors. If they're pulling a permit, aren't they subject to?
We typically get their insurance for anything like that, because a lot of signs, and depending on the type of signs, like canopy signs, awning signs, or projection signs that come out from the building, those are anchored into the building, and the way that they're done is important, because if that fails, that falls on the sidewalk. So we do get their insurance, like if there's for contractors, that's the reason we get insurance. Whenever contractors register with the city, we get their insurance. Do you have liability insurance? Do you have workman's comp insurance? There's policies. I can tell you that Franco spends countless hours entering that stuff. And that's why we want the insurance. We want to make sure that if there's a problem, that somebody's covered. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't cancel the insurance policy tomorrow, but that's the same with an auto, you know. But having said that, at least we have, that we've done our due diligence and we've gotten this information. What they do with that doesn't come into play again until they re-register their property, you know, their license. So when they register their license, they're required to update their insurance. And that's how we've always done that here. So what this is putting it into the ordinance for insurance.
Okay, I would just like a confirmation that those insurance limits are reasonable, which I think they are.
Million?
I think it's $1 million in there.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's gonna depend on the size of the sign too. You know, the coverage policy.
The other thing is too, is that our signs are reviewed by our building inspector as well. So when they're affixed to a building, the building official actually gets a schematic as to how that's affixed. Are they using 3/16 bolts? Are they using 1/2 inch? He gets that, and then before he approves that. So that's part of that. But I can get you whatever information that you would like on that, Rick. Just shoot me an email, and I'll make sure that you get it.
Okay.
Yeah, my suspicion is that most of these installers have these policies.
They do.
And it's not like it's gonna be any big surprise to them if there's now an ordinance that requires it.
It's not. It actually makes it easier for us to get it from them.
Okay. The last item was, I am interested in seeing what we could do to limit temporary signs to a duration or before and after an event. Inclusive of the maximum we could do with just the general opinion signs and anything like that. I think a lot of people have interest in making sure the city looks very clean and whether or not that also ties into if those signs are well maintained, that sort of thing. Okay, so we are looking for a motion to set a public hearing.
For the next regular meeting of the planning commission.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We've got our work cut out to get you all the information you need before then.
All right, we will open it up to public participation. Not seeing any public participation, we'll close public participation. All right, looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. Kristen, thank you very much